Oh, hell no. Not him again. The words weren't loud, but they sliced through the thick courtroom silence like a whisper you weren't supposed to hear. Heads turned. People exchanged glances. Then the heavy wooden doors swung open, and he walked in. Malcolm Pearson, 53 years old. Built like a damn statue. Tall and solid, with skin so smooth and dark it looked like it absorbed the light in the room. His suit? Charcoal gray, tailored so perfectly that it made everyone else look like they had crawled out of a thrift store. His shoes? So polished they practically reflected the miserable expressions of everyone who had the misfortune of being here. But the real kicker? That grin. That smug, relaxed, you can't touch me smile. He wasn't walking in like a man on trial. No, he strolled in like he owned the place. Like this was just another Tuesday brunch for him. Like the courtroom wasn't meant to judge him, but to entertain him. The people sitting on the benches leaned in, watching like they were about to witness some wild act of God. They had seen it before. Malcolm Pearson, the man who never gets convicted. Every time he was dragged into court, judges quit. Cases collapsed. Witnesses disappeared. And yet, here he was again. Like a bad joke that never stopped being funny, at least to him. Judge William Hopkins was not amused. The man looked like he had spent his entire morning chewing on glass. Late 50s, strict, the kind of guy who probably ironed his socks and set his alarm clock 5 minutes early just to scare himself awake. He adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Mr. Pearson, we meet again." Malcolm barely acknowledged him, sliding into his seat like he was at a goddamn poker table instead of a courtroom. "Judge Hopkins," he said smoothly. "Didn't expect to see you. Thought they'd try someone new this time." A couple of reporters in the back snickered. Even the court clerk twitched like she was holding back a laugh. Hopkins' jaw tightened. "This is a court of law, not a reunion, Mr. Pearson. You are facing serious charges." Malcolm leaned back, tapping a finger against the table like he was barely listening. "Yeah? So what's the play this time? Grand larceny? Wire fraud? Tax evasion?" The prosecutor, James Whitmore, stepped forward. Tall, wiry, permanently pissed off. His cheap cologne smelled like desperation. "Money laundering," he said, gritting his teeth. "Among other things." Malcolm whistled low. "Damn, James. You really dusted off the classics for me, huh?" Whitmore didn't flinch. But Judge Hopkins? Oh, he was already looking uncomfortable. Here's what made Malcolm Pearson different from every other rich asshole who got dragged into court. He never got convicted. Ever. Not once. Not for fraud. Not for corruption. Not for a single damn thing they had ever accused him of. And the weirdest part? Every single time he stood trial, the judge changed. They either got sick, resigned, or straight up vanished. This was his 5th trial. And if history had taught anyone anything, it was that Judge Hopkins wasn't going to last long. Nobody ever did. People whispered about it in law offices, over late-night drinks, with the kind of voices you use when you talk about ghosts. Pearson's cursed. No judge lasts more than one case against him. The system doesn't work on him. But the only person who wasn't confused? Malcolm Pearson, because he knew exactly why. The tension in the courtroom was thick enough to choke on. Everyone in that room, from the overworked public defenders to the wannabe hard-ass security guards, knew exactly what was coming. Malcolm Pearson had been here before, 5 times to be exact, and every single time the story played out the same damn way. New judge, new prosecutor, new charges, same ending. And today? It was déjà vu all over again. Judge Hopkins sat on his high horse, gripping the bench like he was holding on for dear life. Maybe he thought if he clenched his fists hard enough, he'd somehow be the one to break the cycle. Spoiler alert, he wouldn't. "Let's get started," Hopkins said, trying to sound firm. But his voice cracked just a little, like a man who already regretted showing up to work. Malcolm? Still grinning. Still looking like the most relaxed man in the room. Which was insane considering that, legally speaking, he should have been sweating bullets right now. Whitmore, the prosecutor, cleared his throat and stood. His whole body language screamed, "I have something to prove. Your Honor, the prosecution is prepared to present substantial evidence proving that Mr. Pearson has engaged in extensive financial crimes, including but not limited to money laundering through shell corporations, tax fraud, and bribery." Malcolm let out a low whistle and shook his head. "Damn, James. That's a hell of a resume. You sure you're talking about me? Sounds like half of Wall Street." A few smothered laughs echoed from the back of the courtroom. Judge Hopkins wasn't amused. "Mr. Pearson, I won't tolerate interruptions." Malcolm raised his hands in surrender, all innocent-like. Wouldn't dream of it, Your Honor. You go right ahead and let James bore everyone to death. Whitmore's jaw clenched so hard it looked like his teeth might crack. He turned to the jury, pacing, trying to look confident. We have multiple witnesses prepared to testify. Employees who worked directly under Mr. Pearson's organizations and can confirm that his financial dealings were fraudulent. Additionally, we have a digital trail linking his assets to offshore accounts. Malcolm snorted. Oh, let me guess. A nameless source? Some intern who accidentally stumbled across the wrong file? Come on, James, you can do better than that. Whitmore ignored him and continued, voice growing louder, as if yelling would somehow make the evidence stronger. This time we have the receipts. There's no walking away from this one, Mr. Pearson. Malcolm chuckled, shaking his head. James, you poor bastard. Judge Hopkins shot him a glare. Mr. Pearson, if you disrupt these proceedings one more time... Malcolm leaned forward, folding his hands on the table and locked eyes with the judge. You're nervous, aren't you? He said, voice so damn calm it was unsettling. Hopkins blinked, as if caught off guard. I beg your pardon? You heard me, Malcolm said, tilting his head slightly. You can feel it, can't you? That little pit in your stomach, that tiny voice in the back of your head screaming at you to get the hell out of this courtroom? The entire room fell into a dead silence. Even Whitmore stopped pacing. Malcolm sat back and smirked. Yeah, that's what I thought. Here's the thing about Malcolm Pearson. It wasn't just that he never got convicted, it was the way it always happened. The judge changed. Every single time. And not because of the usual legal bullshit, recusals, procedural errors, or mistrials. No, the judges disappeared. One suddenly retired the night before sentencing. One got into a car accident on his way to the courthouse. One flat out resigned in the middle of the trial, muttering something about needing to spend more time with his family. And nobody knew why. Nobody except Malcolm. He leaned back in his chair, watching Hopkins start to sweat. The judge shuffled his papers, his hands slightly unsteady. Whitmore frowned. Even he could sense it now. Something was wrong. Malcolm laughed under his breath, shaking his head. I love this part. If tension had a scent, the courtroom reeked of it. Judge Hopkins sat behind his polished wooden desk, but it was clear as day. The man was barely holding it together. His grip on his gavel was just a little too tight, his breathing just a little too shallow. And Malcolm Pearson? Cool as a goddamn cucumber. He sat there completely unfazed, like he was watching a mediocre movie he had already seen 5 times, but was too polite to leave. The jury shifted uncomfortably, throwing uneasy glances at the judge. The prosecution was fuming. Whitmore's face was a whole shade redder, his body stiff like someone shoved a broomstick up his ass. He turned to Hopkins, practically begging for some kind of reaction. Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming. We have bank records, we have testimony. This man has been laundering money for years. We demand a conviction. Malcolm sighed dramatically. James, he muttered, shaking his head like a disappointed teacher. You're really out here trying, huh? Cute. Whitmore snapped. You think this is a joke? He slammed his fist on the table, his voice shaking with frustration. You think you can just walk in here, laugh in the face of the law, and walk out like nothing happened? Malcolm slowly turned to him, smile fading just enough to be unsettling. I don't think, James. He leaned forward slightly, voice dropping to something dangerously calm. I know. Hopkins cleared his throat, trying to wrestle back some control. Enough, he barked, though his voice lacked conviction. The court will now proceed with witness testimonies. Bailiff, bring in the first witness. A side door creaked open, and the first witness, a middle-aged accountant with sweat stains spreading under his arms, walked in. The poor bastard looked like he was about to testify against the Grim Reaper himself. He sat down, eyes darting around the room like he was searching for an escape route. Please state your name for the record, Whitmore instructed, flipping through his notes. The witness licked his lips, swallowed hard. My name is... He paused, blinking. His forehead suddenly drenched in sweat. Malcolm watched, amused as the man's pupils dilated, as his hands started shaking. Sir? Whitmore prompted. Your name? The witness opened his mouth, and nothing came out. Not a sound. His lips moved, his throat worked like he was trying to push words out, but nothing. Dead silence. The jury leaned in, the courtroom held its breath. Judge Hopkins rubbed his temples, his patience crumbling by the second. For God's sake, just answer the question, Mr. Daniels. Daniels, if that was even his real name at this point, just stared ahead, eyes wide with absolute terror. Then, without a word, he stood up, turned around, and walked right out of the courtroom. People gasped. A few reporters scrambled for their phones, whispering to each other. Whitmore? He looked like he was about to combust. Your Honor, we request a recess, he practically shouted, veins popping in his forehead. Hopkins exhaled sharply, massaging his forehead like he had a goddamn migraine. Fine. 15-minute recess. He slammed his gavel down. Malcolm, still grinning. Because this was predictable. This was routine. During the break, the courtroom was a circus of whispered conversations. The media was eating this up. Did you see that? What the hell happened? Is Pearson actually cursed? Whitmore stormed over to Hopkins, voice low, but furious. Your Honor, this is insane. That witness was solid. He had proof. He was ready to testify. Then suddenly he just... He threw up his hands. Malcolm didn't even say anything. How the hell does this keep happening? Hopkins rubbed his eyes, sighing deeply. James, he said, his voice suddenly exhausted. Whitmore froze. There was something in Hopkins' voice. Something off. Hopkins sat back in his chair, eyes flicking to Malcolm, who was sitting at the defense table calmly checking his nails like he was at a damn spa. Then the judge let out a slow breath and stood up. At first, nobody realized what was happening, not until Hopkins removed his robe, not until he placed it neatly on his chair, not until he grabbed his briefcase, turned around, and walked straight out of the courtroom, just like the last judge, and the one before that, and the one before that. For the first 5 seconds, the room was dead silent. Then all hell broke loose. What the fuck just happened? A reporter whispered loudly. Did the judge just quit? Right now? What the hell is Pearson doing to these people? Whitmore? He was frozen, hands still midair like his brain had just short-circuited. Malcolm? He finally laughed. Loud. Amused. Like he was genuinely enjoying himself. He stood, adjusted his cuffs, and started heading for the door. Whitmore snapped out of it just in time. Wait! What the hell do you think you're doing? You can't just leave! Malcolm turned back, still grinning. James, he said, voice dripping with mock sympathy. There's no judge. No judge, no trial. Whitmore's eyes widened. You son of a... But Malcolm? Already gone. The doors swung open. And just like that, Malcolm Pearson walked away. Again, the fallout from Judge Hopkins' sudden resignation hit the courtroom like a goddamn earthquake. For a solid 10 seconds, everyone just sat there, trying to process what the hell had just happened. Then the murmurs started, then the gasps, then the outright chaos. People scrambled for their phones. Reporters whispered in frantic tones, trying to push out breaking news updates before their competitors could. Even the jury looked shell-shocked, their eyes darting back and forth like they had just witnessed some supernatural event. And at the center of it all, Malcolm Pearson, calm, relaxed, smiling like the devil himself. James Whitmore, the prosecutor, looked like he was about 3 seconds away from losing his damn mind. His tie was crooked, his face was red. His hands were shaking as he pointed at Malcolm like he was trying to summon some kind of legal exorcism. This is absolute bullshit, Whitmore exploded, his voice cracking from sheer frustration. You think this is funny, Pearson? You think you can just keep pulling this off? Malcolm tilted his head, looking at Whitmore the same way a cat looks at a particularly stupid bird. James, he said, voice smooth as silk, you've been working your ass off for what? 5, 6 years now, and you still don't get it? Whitmore slammed his hands on the table. What the fuck is there to get, Malcolm? Malcolm chuckled, shaking his head like he was actually feeling bad for the guy. All right, he said, stretching his arms like he had all the time in the world. I think it's about time somebody explained it to you. The courtroom went dead silent. People leaned in. Cameras zoomed in. Whitmore braced himself, and then Malcolm dropped the bomb. You can't convict me, he said simply, because I run this system. For a second, nobody reacted, like their brains needed a minute to fully register what they had just heard. Then, panic. What the hell is he talking about? Wait, what does he mean he runs the system? Is this some kind of joke? Whitmore froze. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Because deep down, some part of him already knew it was true. Malcolm saw it in his eyes. That flicker of realization. That moment of horror when the pieces started falling into place. But Malcolm, he wasn't done. He leaned in, lowering his voice just a little, just enough to make it sound even more terrifying. Do you have any idea, he murmured, how this country actually works? Whitmore swallowed hard. You think the judge is the most powerful person in this room? The guy sitting on that fancy bench slamming his little wooden hammer like he actually makes the rules? Malcolm chuckled, shaking his head.